Hello, my name is Julie, and it's time to take you through the disaster of a reading month I had in July. Okay, maybe disaster is a strong word, but I definitely struggled to find books that I really connected with this month, and we'll talk about it. So, as always, let's just go to my graphs. I read 13 books this month, like I have the last couple months, and I read 4,335 pages, which is the second most that I have read so far this year in a month. However, it is nowhere near how much I have been reading over the summer in the last couple years. So, here's my theory on that. I think that because I have a larger library on audiobook to pull from, that I am picking up shorter audiobooks. When you have an audiobook subscription and you're paying for a credit, you want to buy a bigger book. That's my theory. I had an average rating of 3.38, which, unless I change any of these ratings, that is going to be tied with the second lowest average rating I have had for a month. But you can kind of see over the course of my year, I have just been steadily getting a little bit lower at a time. I had no books that I'm giving a 5-star. I don't have any books that I think I'm considering even giving a 5-star. Had an average of 333 pages per book, so pretty short. An average page count of 139 per day. I read 7 books that I own, either physically or on audiobook. I bought or acquired 4 books. And so that means we're at an annual net TBR of -10. That's great. Here's my genres. My number 1 was mystery, thriller, horror because I participated in summerween this year. As for mediums, as usual, 1/3 on audio. 3/4 of the books I read were standalone, and I did manage to read 2 sequels and 1 conclusion. No first books in series. Let's go. I almost did it. There were 2 books I almost read. And for author familiarity, this graph actually surprised me, considering this is the lowest rated month I've had all year. I have had only 3 authors that were new to me this month. The first book that I ended up reading this month was Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. This was written in the 50s, and it is about a man named David. He is American, and he is a closeted gay man. He is traveling in Europe, and his fiance, who is also American, she is traveling somewhere else away from him. And as he is by himself, he ends up in Paris going to a couple of gay bars and making some friends that are also gay. And he meets this man, Giovanni, who is Italian. He's poor and a bartender. And the two of them really hit it off. But the problem is that David is not ready to confront this side of himself. He is not ready to give up what he sees as his masculinity in order to be happy together, even though he really cares for Giovanni. He also cannot stop judging all of the people around him in this queer space, including Giovanni, who he does seem to love. I've never read a James Baldwin before. I've been excited to for a while. I did listen to the audiobook of this, and I think if I could do this again, I would have chosen to read it physically, because I think I would have liked to be able to spend more time with each sentence rather than, going by the pace of the audiobook. And I did turn down the speed. So it wasn't a question of reading comprehension, it was just wanting more time with the text. The first section of this book, the first part of it, there's sort of the before him and Giovanni are together and the after they have gotten together. And the part of them not being together yet is one of the most beautifully written things I have ever read. I was just pausing and being like, oh my God, that sentence is beautiful. I loved how it was talking about how David is feeling. I just really got a lot out of this take on how queerness and masculinity are put in society as being antithetical to each other. David comes from a very toxically masculine upbringing. He had experiences with other boys when he was a teenager, and he absolutely shut it down by himself because of the way that his father raised him. I think it's also really interesting that James Baldwin decided to write from the perspective of a white man for this. It was not something that I expected going into the book at all, and I only found out at the foreword of the book. That is purposeful, and it's something that's really discussed in the literature around this book. It is the idea that white people are considered raceless in a Western society, just like men are considered genderless. When it's gender studies, it's only about women's problems, but really it's everybody. You also see, even though the characters that we meet are white, Giovanni is Italian, and at this time Italians kind of weren't considered white people. He's constantly being called dark, and how that is kind of tying whiteness to heterosexuality and blackness or darkness or just this other tying that to homosexuality. I really enjoyed like the symbolism of the room itself. I liked the way that we are getting a lot of dramatic irony. We know that something terrible is going to happen at the end of this book by the way that the book keeps telling us that. I felt a lot, but I do feel like I felt a lot more in that first section. I'm giving this a 4.25 right now. I really appreciate this book, and this is one of those books that I would really like to return to later in my life so I can get more out of it, because you can tell that there is more. Then for Summerween and for my most recent vlog, I read The Cabin at the End of the World. So y'all have heard me talk about this in 2 separate places, so I won't go on about it for long. This is about a girl and her fathers who are on vacation in the middle of nowhere. She is just playing outside, and this man comes up to her and is like, "Hey, I want to be your friend. Can I talk to your dads? We need to tell you about something important." And some people show up that look just like him, and basically they're saying that the world is ending. The first section of this book I thought was so tense and gripping and stressful that it was just so much dread was building up. And then when we actually get to the point where we're kind of talking about what the thing going on is, it absolutely lost the pace. It dragged, it didn't feel like it was going anywhere, nothing was really escalating anymore. And this is a book that has a lot of ambiguity to it. It is up to the reader to interpret who is right and who is wrong, and it is purposefully trying to bring every character's perspective into question. So on paper, I don't think this book does a lot wrong. There were things that I appreciated, but I think it just really decided to sit for too long in different things when it could have kept its breakneck pace and continued to have those themes. I am in the middle of the road on this book. I think it's all right, but I think that there are going to be a lot of people who enjoy it spending a lot of time and a lot of people who are going to hate it spending so much time. I just wish that this idea, which is great, was executed differently. This was a 3 for me. Then also for Summerween, I read Ghost Station by S.A. Barnes. Last year, I read Dead Silence by this author and absolutely loved it. This is about our main character, Ophelia, and she is part of this very rich family that has its fingers in every pot. They own a ton of different corporations and everything, and they're very powerful. She had something bad happen to her past. Her family does not like her. She does not like them. And she is a psychologist. She has been studying this condition called ERS that makes people violent. And in order to get away from her family, she gets sent to join this crew that is going to a planet where a former species used to be. They were an intelligent species and they have died off now. She is going there because one of the people on this crew previously died, and she is wanting to monitor their health situation to make sure that ERS doesn't break out because of the stress of having lost one of their companions. And the crew does not like her. They do not want her there. They do not believe that she is being authentic. If you want to read this book, I would not read the synopsis as it is printed on the book or on Goodreads, because it does spoil something that happens well over halfway into the book. You keep thinking this inciting incident is going to happen and it just doesn't. I did not feel like this book built out its ideas very well. I did not think our characters felt three-dimensional. The most interesting thing about her is this backstory that we find out about her, but the way that she approaches thinking about it feels weird because she's supposed to be a psychologist, and it kind of feels like she's being a little bit juvenile about it. The way that her and like the captain of the ship talk about their emotions felt very elementary to me, to the point where I was kind of rolling my eyes whenever they had a conversation. I think the small amount of romance in this book was absolutely unnecessary. Why is it there? I think the most interesting thing about this book was this alien planet that they're on and the species that used to be there. They're literally seeing corpses of this previous species that has been dead for, a long time. I wanted to know more about that. I was so much more interested in the sci-fi aspect of this book, and it did not want to take me there. There were small bits, like maybe the medical part of the horror aspect of this book was interesting. There are a couple of tense scenes, but I was just not convinced by the characters in this book to make this kind of locked room horror work. So this is another 3-star for me. I think some of the sci-fi elements of this were really creative, and I just wish that they would have taken center stage instead of other things. Then again, for Summerween, I read Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. This is a fantasy horror that is inspired by fairy tales in general, not one in particular. And our main character is a princess. She was the 3rd princess. Her family is in charge of this very small kingdom that is in between 2 warring kingdoms, and they are trying to stay protected from any attacks against them. Her oldest sister gets married off to a prince and dies not long after, and her second sister is married off to him instead. Years later, when she has come of age, our main character has been sent off to a nunnery in case something happens again and they need another person to have a political alliance. She enjoys her life in the nunnery, but when her sister ends up giving birth to a child and she's invited to the christening, she finds out that her sister is actually being abused by this prince. She is going to have to use the necromantic magic that this world has to be able to save her sister, and she is going to collect a bunch of weirdos across the land to help her take down this prince. This is a pretty short fantasy horror, and honestly, it is on par with all of the T. Kingfisher I have read so far. It is a solid read. I enjoy my time throughout it. I really enjoyed this world. One of the characters that we have is this little skeleton dog that I think is super cute. I like the way that the magic is portrayed in this book. It does feel very, Rumpelstiltskin, that sort of gothic-y, dark fairy tale. She removes like a tooth of hers to like pay for something. It just has a very fun flavor, all the while having this strong found family element of all of these people who are sort of rejects coming together. And the major plot of this book is trying to break someone out of a abusive situation. And I have read that from T. Kingfisher before with A Sorceress Comes to Call, and I liked both of the conversations that were happening in these. I totally get why people really love this flavor. I think T. Kingfisher is just easy pleasing to me. Good balance of fantasy and horror. The plots are always engaging. They're not too long. It has the right amount of fantasy going on for the length of the book that it is. It's just solid. So I think I'm going to be giving Nettle and Bone a 4-star. Then for my most recent vlog and Summerween, I read Devil House by John Darnielle. I actually listened to this on audiobook because even though I own this, it was at my mom's house, so I couldn't get it until after I had already read it. This is about our main character, Gage Chandler, who is a true crime author, and his first book was a huge success. It was about something that took place in his hometown, and there was a lot of lore around it, and so we had a little bit of the inside scoop. And his other books have not done as well. And so someone at his publishing house has called him up and been like, hey, there's this house where these homicides happened in the 80s that is up for sale. You should go live there and you can get the inside scoop on the next book that way. This is a book that is set up as having different sections. It feels almost short story-like in that each of the sections is focusing on a different thing. So one of the sections is following him moving into the house. 2 of the sections are excerpts from the book that he's writing. One of them is him doing research or whatever, and there's a couple others that are weirder than that. This book may appear to be a horror book, but do not let the cover fool you. Some of the sections of this are more thriller, some of them are more general fiction, but it's definitely not a haunted house ghosty book. Do not go into this book expecting that. It is a book that some people might consider overwritten, but I actually liked the language in here. It's not heavy on the plot, and each of the different sections feels like it's kind of trying to do something different. So it definitely is not the most cohesive book I've ever read. I think that there's one section that was going for this sort of theme, and then the ending just kind of throws something else in there for kind of no reason and made some more poignant things that the book was trying to say earlier feel cheaper or be cheapened by that ending. And overall, my feeling about this book was kind of, what was the point here? It didn't feel like it had a lot of a driving force. There was only one section of this book that I felt like was very strong, and I wish that we would have expanded upon those ideas rather than doing what the other sections did. Those other sections felt more typical, didn't feel as special, and in the grand scheme of things, I don't feel like they mattered that much. This is getting another flat 3 million of those. dime a dozen. Then I ended up reading this monstrosity, but really only one part of it. I read Carrie by Stephen King. This is my bind up of his first 3 books. I also read this for summerween. I don't know if I feel like holding this up the whole time, so I'll just put Carrie on the screen. I'm very glad to get this huge collection off of my shelf because I believe I have had this thing since 2019, and I finally read all 3 books. Carrie is Stephen King's first novel. It's a classic and, has a cult classic movie. I expect that most people know what it's about. This is about Carrie White, who is a teenage girl who has been very isolated. She has been raised by an extremely religious mother, the sort where just about anything is a sin. She's sort of locked up in her house, doesn't have any friends. Everyone makes fun of her at school. She is 17 and is just hitting puberty. And at the same time that changes are happening to her body, they are also happening to her mind because she seems to be developing telekinetic powers. This book is partially told in epistolary format. A good amount of the book is from the perspectives of the characters in town. In between just about every section, we have an excerpt from a book or a newspaper or whatever in the future reflecting on the time that's happening at this moment. We know that something terrible is going to happen. Carrie is going to have a huge outburst and it is going to affect a lot of people. I have not seen the movie of this book, but just from cultural knowledge, I knew basically the hits of what was going to happen in this. I do think that the big thing that happens at the end kind of went further than I thought it was. Like, I thought I knew the scale of the ending and I didn't. But other than that, like, I kind of knew it beat for beat, but also there just isn't a lot of different events that happen in this book. It's like all of the different scenes, we spend a long time there and we might have multiple people talking about what happens in each of these scenes. It just felt kind of slow. Like, this is already a short book. I feel like it could have been even shorter. Absolutely am rooting for Carrie to get out of this abusive situation with her family. The bullying that she experiences is absolutely not fair. I like that kind of good for her sort of thing going on, but I just did not feel strongly about this. And I think maybe if I had not been familiar with this story before, that I might have felt something more for it. So I think I'm giving this like a 3.5. It did what I expected it to. I don't think I will be thinking about this for very long. Then I read A Drop of Corruption by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is the second book in the Shadow of the Leviathan series, which starts out with The Tainted Cup. That came out last year. This one just came out a couple months ago. As you all know, I have been trying to knock down the number of series that I'm in the middle of, and part of that is finding out if I even want to continue on in these series. And everyone and their mom loved The Tainted Cup last year. According to my research, which I watched over 200 booktubers' best books of 2024 videos, The Tainted Cup was the #1 mentioned 2024 fantasy release. Everyone talked about some sort of Brandon Sanderson, but everyone's in a different place. The 2 big books of last year were The Will of the Many, which is a 2023 release, and The Tainted Cup, which is a 2024 release. So it should have won the Goodreads Choice Award, but more people who don't read fantasy are reading the other 2 books, even though I saw basically nobody talking about The Familiar or whatever the House in the Cerulean Sea book was. Point is, I was not enchanted by book 1. I thought the fantasy world was so interesting, but I did not like the way that the mystery was done. It felt like things were just kind of being told to us as they were happening instead of things being built. I didn't feel like I had an idea of the scale of the mystery, but I still thought I would give this one a shot because it was getting just as good ratings, to see if maybe a second shot, a different mystery would work. And you know what? It did. I'm glad I gave this a shot. In this book, Anna and Din, who are our Holmes and Watson characters, have gone to this kingdom that is next to the Empire. They're like one of the last countries that is not controlled by the Empire. And they have been called because a man who was in a locked room high up in the air somehow escaped and was found dead somewhere else. And they are having to solve how this ties into the politics of this kingdom, especially because the Empire is soon going to be taking it over. The mystery in this book was so much better, and my opinion is because we are much more up close and personal with the different political mechanisms that are causing these things to happen. happen. Like, if you are not up close and personal with the things that end up being, you know, the bad person or the bad group, it's not interesting. It doesn't feel rewarding. And this did feel rewarding. I could see where all of the things were being set up. I could be like, oh, this is going to be important later. Felt like I was collecting clues and I had a greater grasp on the entire situation, and I was able to, you know, make my guesses. I would also like to say, I think that this series is going to be more of a companion series than a strict sequential series. I could kind of tell by the fact that this says an Anna and Din mystery on it. I do think you should start with a Tainted Cup because it gives you information about how the world works. But if this is going to go on past a trilogy, if this is going to be longer, I think that you might just be able to kind of read the series as it goes. I was expecting for this to have a larger fantasy plot that connected to the previous book, but it really didn't. It felt like a fairly isolated mystery, except for needing to understand a couple of things about how this fantasy world works. I really like the flavor of this series, how it is biological graphs that are made out of like algae and plants and bacteria that people put on their skin to have different superpowers. Almost all of their technology is tied into plants and nature, and I think that is so fun. And the Leviathans, these giant creatures that are trying to attack the Empire. Honestly, I would have liked to see more of them in this book, but the way that we did interact with them in this book was very interesting to me. This is another 4-star for me. I think I gave The Tainted Cup a 3-star. This is the only sequel that I have read this year that I think is genuinely better than the first book. Not just in my enjoyment, I think it's of a higher quality. That might just be me because everybody loved that book but me, but I've had some fails from Robert Jackson Bennett before, so I do plan on continuing on in this series and I am caught up on it now, so that makes my numbers look better. Then I read The Pisces by Melissa Broader. I sure hope you've watched my previous vlog. This is about a woman named Lucy who is in a low commitment relationship for a very long time, and that ended up ending, and now she is absolutely adrift. She doesn't know what she's doing with her thesis, and she feels this need to fill the void of not having this relationship in her back pocket anymore. So she starts going out on all of these dates, and all of them are going absolutely terribly, and like not in a fun, terribly way. She ends up meeting on the beach a man who's in the water swimming, and she starts to really like him and connect to him. And then it turns out that he's a merman and they want to be together. I'm gonna be straightforward. This is one of my least favorite books I've ever read in my life. I hated every single second of this book. I'm gonna try to keep this short because I did go into full detail in that video. I think the author very early on in the book warns you that this book is going to be very gross. Almost every single bodily function that you can think of is talked about in gross detail, most of them in relation to sex. I think our main character is just unlikable to the nth degree. Like, her and almost all of the characters are just kind of caricatures. They don't feel real, but it also didn't feel like a full satire to me. It was not funny. It was just gross, and I thought that this was being gross in its language, in its description, and what it wanted to talk about, and how it had attitudes towards other people and our main character. I think that it was gross for no reason. I think it was gratuitous, and I just felt very little empathy for our main character because of the way that she thinks about other people, because of the things that she's doing. And I was really hoping for the last section of this book for our main character to sort of recover in some sort of way, and I do not think she makes any meaningful change. I just think that this was gross and an unlikable main character who does not really get redemption in my mind. And I could have handled one without the other, but I could not handle both. I think this was absolutely painful to get through. I understand that the major themes of this book is about how if you are constantly chasing this idea of what society tells you a relationship should be, and if you are going to isolate yourself, there's going to be disastrous results. And I think those themes were extremely apparent from the very beginning. There was no part of this book that surprised me. I just almost DNF'd this book. I almost almost just like read the last page and kept going on, but I just wanted to be proven wrong. I wanted this book to change. I don't think that I gained anything by finishing this book, and I wish I would have DNF'd it. And I think that this is kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back. I might have to start DNFing books now. I would hope that in the future I would have the fortitude to be able to DNF were I to come across this again. This is a 1 star. I would give it 0 stars if I could. If you enjoyed this book, I'm so sorry. There is no change in my mind that this is not a good book. In fact, it's bringing into question how I rated her other books. Then I read Blood of Elves by Andrzej Sapkowski. This is the 3rd book in the Witcher series, but also it is the 1st novel. The other 2 are short story collections, and this is the 1st full-length novel. The Witcher is a fantasy series about Geralt of Rivia, who is a witcher. He is a genetically enhanced person who is trained to kill monsters, and there are very few of his kind left. And in this book, his ward, Ciri, is sort of coming into herself. She is like doing witcher training, but she is also a very powerful magical conduit, and so they are wanting to train her in magic. This book, even though it is supposed to be a novel, was sort of formatted like a short story collection, just like the other ones, where each of the sections kind of felt separate from each other, where we deal with one subject matter for a significant portion of time. My overwhelming thought on this book is that just not a lot happened. There just weren't that many events. I felt uncomfortable by the way that Ciri and Yennefer were interacting with each other. Geralt was barely in this book. The only thing that I thought was interesting was Ciri starting to train, trying to start becoming an adult and everything. We didn't see a whole lot of, Geralt fighting monsters or whatever. It was just kind of setup of this war's about to happen. A little bit of setup and no payoff. If you would have told me this was a prequel book, that would have made way more sense. I've been told that this is a series that I'm very likely to DNF, and just because I felt so very little during this, I think that might happen. So at this moment, I am not DNFing this series, but there is a good chance that I might decide to DNF it before the end of the year. And the last sequel that I have on this list, but not the last book, is The Winners by Frederick Bachman. I wanted to add one more book to my TBR for this month. I had you all vote in these different categories. It was like the fantasy book of right now, a last book in a beloved series, a general fiction that everyone loved last year, or a book that I don't know if I'm gonna like. And you all picked a series finale. So thank you for that, because that's another series I got off my TBR. This is the 3rd and final book in the Beartown series, which is about a town in northern Sweden, very isolated in the woods, and they are very dependent on their junior league hockey team, emotionally, culturally, but also financially. And something terrible happens that has to relate to the club, and the town is divided on how to deal with it. The 2nd book takes place 6 months after the 1st book, and this book takes place 2 years afterwards. So some of the main teenage characters from the 1st book are off in the world and are coming back. We are introduced to new characters, some of them from the neighboring and rival town of Head. Main thing that's going on in book 2 and book 3 is how the 2 towns, Beartown and Head, they're out in the middle of nowhere with nobody but each other, and they hate each other so much. That's part of the culture of being there, is hating the other town. And there just really aren't that many financial resources going around for both of these towns to stay above water. And at the beginning of this book in particular, there is a big storm that ends up affecting both of the towns, and a couple of people come home because of this natural disaster that's happened. I really adore Frederick Bachman. First, I would like to shout out, I believe his name is Neil Smith. Neil Smith is Frederick Bachman's translator, and I want to give a huge shout out to him for making all of his language feel natural. There's so many translated books that I have read where you can really tell that there is being something lost in the translation, or it doesn't feel natural to English readers, and this absolutely does. So shout out to him. The major theme of this book, in my opinion, is talking about the patriarchy. Almost every single perspective in this book has been shaped by these sort of masculine ideas, and the hockey club is sort of this symbol of masculinity there. There are female characters who have been harmed by men, and there are men who are being driven to doing terrible things because they have these such strong ideas of masculinity. And there are other men who have been hurt by others and themselves. Almost every single chapter, he is hitting home something that talks about how toxic masculinity corrupts people. I think he does a very very good job with an ensemble piece. These books, especially the sequels, are a little bit of kitchen sink dramas where everything dramatic that could happen does happen, but it plays off in a better way because it is an ensemble piece, so each person just has their own drama that's going on. They are all tied together. It is a small town where everybody knows everybody, and I think that there were some big dramatic things that happened in this book that are pretty emotional. I did not feel as emotionally attached in this book as I did in the first book. I think the first book is the best book. I think this one's second best, but I really enjoy how Fredrik Backman portrays characters. I think he just does amazing work writing things that are universal experiences, writing each of these individual characters and making them all feel so universal. And I'm very glad to have gotten this series off of my list, and now I have 2 other Fredrik Backmans that I own that I can get through. Then I decided to read Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann. This is a nonfiction true crime book that was turned into a movie last year, 2 years ago, with Leonardo DiCaprio and Lily Gladstone. And this is about how at the beginning of the 1900s, the Osage people, who were currently located in Oklahoma, they were per capita the richest people in America. So when they were moved from their previous home by relocations by the American government, they were able to work out so they had the right to anything that was found underground on their land, and it would be shared amongst the community. A ton of oil was found under their land, so they became very rich. However, there were a lot of caveats to that, especially because a lot of them were not allowed to use their own money in their own way. In the 1920s, there were a series of seemingly unrelated murders that kept happening to different Osage people. Because the reservation was not properly part of the state of Oklahoma, there wasn't really a correct jurisdiction to do the investigation. There was a Bureau of Investigation that the US had, founded by Teddy Roosevelt, but it did not really have the power to do what the FBI does now. And so this is one of the cases that ended up forming the FBI as we know it today. This book is kind of told in 3 sections. The first section is setting up who were all the different players, who was being killed, who were the bad guys. The second section is talking about the FBI's investigation led by Tom White and how they had to do essentially a bunch of spy work to be able to find things out about this case. And the final section is our author in the 2000s going back and doing more research and seeing if there was anything the FBI didn't find, because it does feel like the FBI's case kind of ended with a bow on top. I was very engaged with this at the beginning as we're finding out the case. There were so many more murders that were happening than I anticipated, and it was very clear that there was some sort of conspiracy going on because anybody who tried to look into the case either died or they stopped looking into it pretty quickly. I think this book was too short. It kind of felt like it didn't sit in any thought for very long. I think we got all of our information, but it ended up just going by so quickly that it felt like there wasn't a lot there. Even when we are talking about the 2000s section, that's actually the shortest section of the whole book. I was anticipating that, because this case is so old, it's 100 years old at this point, we would get more detail when it came to investigating in the present, but we get a little bit. I think that the work that he did was important, and it's really good that we have this book so we can see how the racism was existing at that time to systematically kill off all these people, try to rob them of anything they had. And any time that we see people of color in America's history thriving, how white people are trying to stamp it out. I think he did a pretty respectful job with talking about the case. I really enjoyed learning about this era in history. I think the founding of the FBI part of this book was interesting, but again, I just kind of was left wanting more. I wonder if I were to watch the movie of this and it's more dramatizing the lives, because I think the movie focuses more on Molly Burkhart, who is Lily Gladstone's character. I just was like, why are we spending no time with Molly? And I think it's because there's only so much of a paper trail with all of these people. Like, we can spend so much time with the FBI investigators because there is documentation in a way that there isn't with Molly. When this did get narrative, narrative, I did like it. I just wish there was more to grab onto here. Then I read The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. I read Hamnet last year and really enjoyed it, so I wanted to check out her other work. This is about Lucrezia de Medici, who is one of the children of Cosimo, who was the Medici. He was in charge of Florence at the time. He was so overwhelmingly powerful because of how much money he had that he just had his hands in absolutely everything. Lucrezia is a daughter that the family didn't really like, and when her older sister is engaged to this duke, she ends up dying. And Lucrezia, who is only 12 at the time of her sister's death, is put into line to marry him. And she ends up marrying him at 14, I believe. And we also know when she is married to him for about a year, she believes that he is trying to murder her. We are flipping back and forth between her entire life up until this moment and this couple of day period when she believes she is going to be killed. This book came about by this poem that was inspired by Lucrezia and the duke she was married to, that is about a man who ends up murdering his wife and is looking at the portrait of her. So the portrait that is painted for their marriage is very important to the story. And it turns out one of the only surviving portraits of Lucrezia de Medici is not her marriage portrait. It is the other one done of her, is actually in Raleigh, North Carolina at the museum. And I saw it this weekend. I decided to go see it. I was like, well, I read a whole book about it. It's on the cover of the book. I gotta go find it. So here it is. I did not care strongly for this book. I loved in Hamnet. It's a shorter book, but every single scene, there's so much that is going on under the surface. Like every scene probably takes the space of 1 minute of actual time, but there's so much going on in it, and I got a lot out of the language, and I got so much emotion out of these characters that we knew for a very short amount of time. Lucrezia, we follow her throughout her entire life. We see how she's being neglected, nobody's really caring about her, and it's a very typical what you would expect from a story of a woman at that time, how she is not respected and she is put into an abusive marriage and is not cared about. I didn't expect a whole lot of plot in this book, but I just didn't feel like a lot happened to this book. I didn't feel overly connected to Lucrezia. I don't think I bought this book. I didn't feel attached to it. I just think a good litmus test of if I'm liking a book, specifically an audiobook, is if I want to turn on the audiobook or if I would rather listen to a podcast on my way home from work. I understand why other people would like this book because on paper, I don't think it does anything wrong. I just didn't connect to it. I think I'm giving this like a 3.5. And the last book that I read this month was an ARC that was very kindly sent to me by Tor.com. Thank you guys so much. Love ya. And that is Automatic Noodle by Annalee Newitz. This is one of my most anticipated releases of the year. It is a cozier sci-fi novella, definitely cozier than the other books that Annalee Newitz has written. I read all of their fiction. I think it's being published the first week of August, so this should be out by the time you're seeing it. This takes place decades in the future where a war has happened where California is no longer a part of the United States. And there is also a lot of climate change that has ravaged this area. And this takes place in San Francisco, where there are a bunch of robots who all are conscious beings. They were part of this ghost kitchen that was run by this shitty corporation. And this group of robots that has survived this war have woken up in this restaurant after it's been shut down for months, and they decide that they want to open up their own restaurant to make good food and take care of the people who are around them. The book that I would most compare this to is Light from Uncommon Stars. I also think that this is supposed to be, marketed for Becky Chambers fans, and Becky Chambers actually is one of the blurbs on the back. There is a small Legends and Lattes aspect of them making the restaurant, but I do think that that sort of takes a back seat to the ideas here. The robots here are an allegory for immigrants and how a lot of the people in this area, when they're trying to set up their restaurant, don't want people like them to be making their food. And even though these robots are fully conscious beings and everything, they do not have the same rights that the humans do, even though California is supposed to be the better place for them to be staying. This book is only 160 pages. We do get a short backstory of each of the robots. We get to see them build the restaurant and struggle, as there are some people who don't want them to be able to have the restaurant and ultimately be able to build a community. I think this did exactly what it set out to do. I think it had the right like beginning, middle, and end. For this to be a perfect book for me, I actually would have liked to see more of that building of the restaurant sort of thing. I think that this could have been a little bit longer and given us a little bit more time with everything, but ultimately I do think this was a successful novella. When a lot of novellas do not work for me, I think it is a crime that they are that long. So I am giving this a 4-star for the moment. And those are all the books that I read in July. Please let me know what you read in July. I hope you had a much better reading month than I did, because I sure had some flops. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought. And if you've made it this far and don't have anything to say, leave me a little robot emoji down in the comments and let me know you're here. And send me some good vibes for next month to be so much better. But thank you so much for watching. If you would like to watch more of my videos, you can subscribe down below. And if you want to find out when I'm making new videos, you can hit that bell and help the channel by watching stuff when it comes out. And if you'd like to find me anywhere else, you can find me at the links in the description. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.